Hello and welcome. Recently, you may recall that I was opining about physical books versus digital books, about reading and writing physically on paper and reading a physical paper-based book as opposed to doing the same thing online in some kind of digital way. And it's not that I don't use digital products, of course I do, and they can be extremely handy. It's to do with retention, it's to do with understanding, and particularly what I was talking about was Gen Z, Generation Z. Allegedly, apparently, the first generation to show a downward trend in terms of being smarter or not than their parents and the people who came before them. And according to at least the comments that people kindly left and made on that video, quite a few people agree. And I thought, therefore, despite there being many other things we could talk about right now, I thought, therefore, that it could be useful to draw your attention, if you didn't know about this already, to an article from the BBC. I'll read you a couple of snippets. Back to books. Sweden's schools cutting back on digital learning. Laptops became mainstream in Swedish classrooms in the late 2000s and early 2010s, which a lot of people point to as being where, round about then, some of the current present day issues began. By 2015, around 80% of pupils at municipal state-funded high schools had individual access to a digital device, according to official data. I remember the push, and it did sound like a good thing. I'm not going to say, hey, I never thought getting a laptop or getting a computer in front of kids was a bad thing, and I still don't. But as we'll see, and I'll quote from a book that I've mentioned already, The Digital Delusion Soon, there's quite a nice way to think about that, in the sense that, in my opinion, and I'm not alone, it's gone too far. Anyway, from the same BBC article, but the current right-wing coalition, which came to power in 22, is moving teaching in a different direction. We're trying, actually, to get rid of screens as much as possible, says Jor Forsell, an education spokesperson for the Liberal Party, whose leader is Sweden's education minister. Interesting. With higher ages in schools, you might use them a little bit more, but with lower ages or in school, I don't think we should use screens at all. Neither do I. What are we doing? Shoving screens in the hands of young kids. Oh, it'll make them literate digitally. No, it'll make them less literate overall and less able to problem solve. The government has frequently used the slogan Fran Skarm Til Parm, which is perfect pronunciation, by the way. I'm telling you that if you're not Swedish. Otherwise you'll spot that it wasn't. Which sounds catchy in Swedish and translates to from screen to binder. I think it sounds kind of catchy in English as well. It argues that screen-free lessons create better conditions for children to concentrate and develop their writing and reading skills. Yes, again, we've talked about that. There's been an increased awareness of the disruption that technology is causing in classrooms, says Dr. Cecilia Nutley, a neuroscientist affiliated with the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm, who is amongst those who have raised concerns about the use of digital tools. Again, good for you. Thank you for doing that. Nutley says that pupils can lose concentration through seeing what other children are doing on screens. She also points to a growing body of international research which suggests reading texts on digital devices can make it harder for children to process information. Yes, it can. And that heavy screen use can even impact younger pupils' brain development. Yes, it does. We've talked about those studies. It's scary. It's frightening. This is like very, very young kids right away, particularly in those formative years when the wiring is being formed, the circuitry is being laid down, the pattern of functionality and connectivity in the brain is perhaps at its most plastic ever. So, effect it has. Not a good one. A new report from Trade Association Swedish EdTech industry warns that a more analogue education risks pupils being underprepared for future jobs. Now, this is a common argument, and I get the argument to a degree, but I think it is misinformed, because I don't think it will make the difference that people will think it will make. In fact, it will benefit children if they don't focus on just setting them up like essentially robots or ultimately slaves of AI. Contentious? Maybe. Everybody needs digital basic skills in order to enter the workforce, argues Jani Jeppesen, the association CEO and a former teacher. She cites a recent EU report which estimates that 90% of jobs will soon require digital skills. But what does that mean? Have you ever had to learn like a spreadsheet, for example, or how a particular word processor works? It's things that you've got to learn kind of by rote to access those devices, to get an output from them. And that can change depending on the system. So I'm not quite sure what we're talking about here. If it's coding, then yeah, that's a different thing. But no, also the AI seems to be able to code quite well these days. So what should we be concentrating on? I think we should be concentrating on smarter people able to think for themselves, to think critically, to problem solve, to ask the right questions of these systems, and indeed what they're doing, pressing buttons on a machine. I mean, what is that really going to look like? What are we actually training them for? Particularly, again, with this tsunami of AI that is coming our way, that is, in part, here. Going on, same article. Again, these are just snippets from that BBC article. The internet has kind of taken over the younger generations, and I've noticed them kind of lose focus easier, says Alexios, who's 18, who doesn't want his younger siblings to use digital tools in school as much as his generation did. Alexios, yes, critical thinking. Well done. Thank you. There's hope. But others, like 19-year-old Jasmine, are in favour of digital education even for primary school age children. Let's focus more on computers, because if we're being realistic, the whole world is using computers. If we're being realistic, sorry Jasmine, but the whole world isn't. And this is, but I get where Jasmine's coming from. I do actually understand that. It would seem at first glance that Jasmine's approach is the right one. Yes, gosh, everything's digital. Let's get them in front of a computer. But it's a very interesting, let's say, separation of thinking, a bifurcate here. We need to be careful of what do we mean by that and what does it not mean, and essentially what's the pitfall. So this is from the book Digital Delusion. Consider driving. You might believe schools should teach students how to drive. Fair enough. But it doesn't follow that schools should now teach every subject in a car. And this is this idea of digital computer training, whatever that might mean, using computers, computer learning, computer teaching, as opposed to using them as a tool, but allowing people to think separately from those devices, to write things down, to problem solve, to discuss. So, what we teach and how we teach are not the same. Through a kind of linguistic sleight of hand, the claim schools should teach computer skills, and it's really important, has morphed into schools should teach all skills through computers. That's fantastic. That's the focus. That is, I believe, much of what the counter-argument against what Sweden is doing, proposing and doing, is about. They're not quite grasping. Let me read that again. I think this is so important. Schools should teach computer skills has morphed into schools should teach all skills through computers. That's the difference. That's the differential. So, again, just a snippet from the same book, end of a sentence, students need to learn coding, digital navigation, and online etiquette. But that doesn't mean we need to reconfigure every class, from reading and writing to math or maths and science around a screen. When it comes to pedagogy, we should choose the tool best suited to the job and not the most ubiquitous one. So what do you think about that? Do you think Sweden's approach is a good one? Do you think this will actually cause children to be left behind in the digital revolution? Will they not understand AI? And if we think about AI for a second, I believe that kids should be smarter. Not only do they need taught to understand what it can do, what it can't do, what it might do wrong, and how vulnerable that might leave them, but also they have to be clever enough to actually take a big step back and look at this beast that is among us right now.